Recently, I pulled up Google and I searched for a React Native image viewer. We've all been there. I was building a custom chat UI from scratch. And our chat supports images, so I needed the ability to tap an image and expand it. And it had to feel like iMessage. I refused to ship it to iOS otherwise. But I struggled to find anything that came close. I needed an image viewer with shared element transitions, pinch to zoom, double tap to zoom, pan to close, multi-image support, modal support, flashless support, high performance, and a clean API. I needed an image viewer that felt native. And here is the result on the BeatGig iPhone app. Native feel is the most important benchmark. You can see that I can press, tap, pinch, zoom, drag, and slide between different images. I get what I'd expect from a good app. One nice detail is the image in the list is compressed, but the one that expands is high resolution. And when I long press an image, I get native-style reactions with a native context menu. As an iPhone user, you feel right at home. And that's the image gallery that we will build today. So let's define the API first. When I'm making something reusable, I like to code for consumption. Even when I'm building something in my own app, I imagine myself as this future user of the code. A clean API isn't just aesthetics. It's reducing mental overhead. I just want to make an image pop up when it's tapped. That's it. I don't want to spend time coordinating navigation or dealing with low-level gesture primitives. And I definitely don't want to be creating refs, measuring views, and calling any extra hooks. Building for consumption is a way to be empathetic to your future self, and in turn, to your users. So here we go. Let's build Galleria. We'll start with an empty component and address all of our requirements along the way. The first thing we'll add is galleria.image. This is the inline component. It's the image that you'll tap. Now, I want to flag the fact that the galleria.image takes a source prop. This might look completely natural, but this subtle design choice actually makes things very complicated. If galleria.image has to render an image under the hood, what is it using? Is it Expo image, or React Native fast image, or the slow built-in React Native image? I just want to let you tap an image and expand it. And I don't want to re-implement any of the features from those libraries. This is the first place I got tripped up. And I'll touch on those issues a little bit later. But for now, let's make a change to our API. Galleria.image is now opened up. Instead of implementing an image itself, it's going to receive one as a child. Now the question is, where is this image coming from? Well, wherever you want. Galleria should and will work with any image component, including Expo image, fast image, or the built-in React Native image. It has no knowledge of what library is happening under the hood. Now, you might be wondering, why did I split up Galleria and Galleria.image? Well, recall one of our requirements from earlier. We need multi-image support. We need the ability to tap one photo in a gallery and swipe side to side between them. So in our Galleria component, at the root, we add a URLs array. And in our Galleria.image component, we add an index prop. This way, we can easily render a list, and all of them will be grouped together. And the item with the index prop, of course, will indicate to the pop-up which item should open first. Now, if you wanted to build this in React Native, how would you do it? Your mind might jump to stitching together a mix of a modal or some React navigation screens together with reanimated and gesture handler. But after a few hundred lines of code, you will probably be unsatisfied. So let's explore a different way. Rather than ask, what's the best JS-based implementation? Instead, consider, what is the best native outcome? Even though all platforms should have a single API, they don't need to be the same. Unified API, platform-specific implementation. Today, we're going to build an image viewer for React Native, but we won't touch reanimated or gesture handler. Instead, we're going to build it in Swift. I think you will be shocked at how easy this is. And if you've never touched Swift before, in just a few minutes, you'll have the confidence to use it for a library of your own. So after searching for a similar library in Swift, I came across imageviewer.swift from Michael Henry, and it looked pretty great. And I started wondering what would it take to get this to work in React Native. And the recording here makes it seem a little glitchier than it is because they're just some GIFs. And mind you, I have never built an app using Swift before. So I started by creating an Expo module. And we're going to build it live. OK, so we'll start by defining our types, remembering these API requirements. OK. So here I have Galleria props and Galleria image props. This is pretty basic, a list of strings or just image required types. OK, this part is pretty simple. Now, we'll go to the actual JS implementation in the Galleria file. So to start, I'm going to create the Galleria component. This is just a context provider that's passing down the URLs. That's it. The second thing I'll do is call require native view manager. This is going to access the actual Galleria component that we're about to build on the Swift side. Lastly, I just need to create galleria.image. This is, as you'd expect, going to receive children, the index prop, and it accesses the URLs from the context. And when I render this, all I'm doing is returning this native view that we created up above. I'm passing it these two props that we required earlier, the index and URLs. And you can see that I get this error from the image. The reason is, one, I haven't imported it. And the reason we're doing this is I want to support both remote URLs and local files. So this resolve asset source simply turns a local import into a string that can then be accessed by the native app as a URL. So the example app is pretty simple. It's an iPhone Photos style app. Here we have a flash list that has a 3-column grid, and we're rendering our Galleria image in each one. You can see that it receives an index, and at the root, we're passing the URLs. And this is not doing any sort of children mapping. This is all being done through context and with native views. So let's get to the harder part. Let's check out the native code. The first thing I'm going to do is just open the docs of this native library and see what it suggests. So it tells me to install these packages in my pod spec, which is like your package.json for iOS in the case of CocoaPods. So I'm going to go down to the iOS folder of the library. And in the pod spec, I've added these already. And I've already run the install script. So you could just run pod install. But I'm not doing that part live because it might take a little bit. So once this is done, we're going to get to the actual development of the iOS app. So the easiest way to do this is to actually open your example app in the repo for your Expo module. Go to iOS, and I'm going to open this in the Finder. From here, I'll open the Xcode workspace file, which is going to take you here to Xcode. And maybe some of you have never even opened Xcode before. That was me not too long ago. From here, I go to pods, and then development pods. And in this folder, I have Galleria. So here you have a view and a module, and we're going to start by focusing on the view. So now I have the imports up top that the library suggested for me, and I've cleared out all the boilerplate that Expo gives you. So let's go back to the docs and start implementing this library. First thing it tells me to do is just create a UI image view, and then I'm going to call setup image viewer on it. So I'll simply copy this, and I'm going to create a setup image view function of my own. I'll create the UI image view. And then I see here, this is kind of what we want, right? We want a list of URLs. So I'll copy that, and I'll paste it in. OK, so no errors, pretty good to go so far. But we already have one problem, which is I don't want to create a new UI image view. I don't want to manage the image. Instead, I want to get the image instance from the children. So I'm going to create a new function here called getChildImageView. This is going to return an optional UI image view instance. And we'll start by creating this variable React subviews. All this does is checks this view's React subviews, which is a method on the RCT view. And you can see here in the Expo view, this is just extending the RCT view. So here we have access to our subviews. And I'm just going to loop over these. So we're checking each React subview. And then for each one of those, we want to get the actual native subview. So dot subview on a React subview will get you the native ones. So we'll do a nested loop here. OK, so we have 4 React subview and React subviews. Then for each React subview, we're going to loop over its native subviews, which is just this dot subview. Lastly, we're going to say, and this is a little different from JavaScript syntax, if let image view is subview as UI image view. If you use TypeScript, this as will probably look like just a normal typecast, but from what I've learned recently, this functions a bit more as like an instance of for a class. So that way we're checking if this variable in the if statement, we're actually assigning it. If it's a type of UI image view, we return it, and there we go. Okay, so I'll go ahead and replace this creation of UI image view with get child image view. And I get my first error. Well, it's upset that I haven't unwrapped this value, right? It's possibly optional. So I'll just go ahead and fix that by adding guard here and else return. This is a pretty nice feature of Swift coming from JavaScript. I like being able to declare a variable, and if it returns null, it just early returns, so none of this code gets evaluated. The next problem is we have this array of just static URLs, which we obviously don't want. We want to pull in the URLs prop from React. So very simply, I'll add a property here that is URL. So I have this URLs. It's a string array. And anytime it updates, we're going to call this setUpImageView function. So Swift has this thing called didSet, which I've thought of a little bit like a use effect. It happens whenever this variable changes. So we want to call setUpImageView anytime the URLs change. I'll go ahead and replace this array with self.urls. And here I once again get 2 errors. This time, one of the errors is simply the fact that it's nullable, just like we had before. But the other one is actually the fact that we're giving it an array of strings, but it expects an array of URLs. So the first thing I'll do is simply map over these. So I'm using compact map, which is kind of like map in JavaScript. And I turn each URL into an actual URL class. But I still get this error because it expects a non-optional value. So I'm going to copy this and put it up in the same guard statement. Swift does not, or like Xcode does not have a very good prettier, so I've had to kind of manually format this as I go. But we can see now that the errors are gone. So I'll quickly do the same thing with the index prop. And we'll just say let index equals self.index. And we'll just pass it to the setUpImageViewer function right here. OK. So should we try to run it? Let's see what happens. I'll hit play up top. That's all you really need to do. And keep in mind, this is nothing like fast refresh. If you've never built an iOS app, it's actually having to rebuild all the code here. OK, it succeeded, thank God. So here we have some puppies and a cat. It seems like it's working, but when I click it, actually nothing's happening. OK, so let's try to figure out what's going on. See if you can think, like, what here in this code would make it such that it's not working? Well, first of all, where are we calling setUpImageView? That's what's actually leading us to have an image gallery. So let's just dig into what setUpImageView is doing and what it's happening under the hood. Here we have an image view, and we're calling setUpImageViewer. So like, where does that come from? Well, by importing ImageViewer.Swift, that library is actually overwriting the built-in ImageView instance, or class. So I learned this is a bit of a common practice, it seems, in Swift, kind of like the old days of JavaScript, where we would overwrite the prototype. They're adding functions so that any UI image view can call setUpImageViewer on it. Now, the problem that we're facing here, the reason it's not working, is because we've only set to call this whenever one of these variables changes. But what we want to do is call setUpImageView whenever there's a React subview added. Anytime we have a child that's added or changed, we want to make sure that we're calling this function. So there's a built-in method on the RCT view called insert React subview. So I'm going to go ahead and override that. And I'll start by just calling super insert React subview. And in there, we'll call setUpImageView. OK? So now, whenever there's any change to our children, we're going to call this function. So I'll go ahead and try to build it again and see what happens. Hopefully, my build times aren't too bad, but it seems like it's going somewhat quickly. And it already succeeded. So we'll pull this up. But again, when I click, I'm still getting nothing. And if you've built an Expo module before, I'm sure you know what I'm missing here. I'm going to go back to this folder on the left. Notice that we've only focused on gallery of views so far. But we're not actually getting any feedback from React yet. And the reason is we need to go to the module and declare our props here. So this is the Galleria module. Anytime that you send a value as a prop, if you want to actually mutate the view, you need to do it here. So this is a little more imperative than React. Basically, the way it's going to work is you use this prop function that Expo modules gives us. And here's the key of the prop, right? So that's URLs, which in the JavaScript case all the way back here, that is this key right here. And this is going to be the value. So the value is going to be this array of strings right here. And this is the view instance. So I simply do view.urls. I mutate that view class, and I add this value. So I'll just go ahead and do the same thing for index. Oops. Prop.index. OK. So here's the index that we get. It's an optional int. And so this should be mutating the Galleria view now every time one of those values changes. So I'll go ahead and hit play. OK, last chance here, because I am expecting this one to work. So I'll hit the puppy, and there we go. Now we have a working image viewer. Do all the features work? Do I have my requirements met? Can I pinch to zoom? I can. Can I double tap to zoom in and out? Yes. Can I swipe side to side? It also works. All this is working totally fine, and if I drag it back, I get the shared element transitions too. We have the clean API, we have the fast performance, all of it. Yeah, sorry, I cut you off there. It's working great, and it was easy to do. Now just bear with me for a second while I get these slides fixed back up. So, in just a few dozen lines of code, we built a working image gallery for iOS in React Native. Now, we didn't have time to get to Android or web, but you'll be able to see these in the source code soon, and Alan from BeatGig did a great job building the Android side with Kotlin. The real Galleria will have more features. You'll have things like dark mode. You might notice that the background was white there, even though our image gallery was black. You'll be able to customize all that, the components up top, and more. Now, the answer is simple, but the path is complex. Once I solve a programming problem, I often think, like, oh, that's it. You know, if I want a good image gallery in React Native for iOS, I just need to write like 40 lines of Swift and copy and paste it from some docs. You're telling me that that's all it takes. The thing is, it's a little more complex than that. It only tells half the story. For Galleria, there was a key abstraction question. How can I make the inline image component as good as Expo image? So my first attempt was to wrap Expo image on the native side. Because remember, on the native side, I needed access to the UI image view instance. So I started by adding Expo image to my pod spec, and I tried to extend the class from the Swift file, but I basically got nothing but errors. None of it worked, and it was clear that that was not the intended usage. So my second attempt was to fork Expo image and copy-paste all of its features. But this was pretty miserable. I wanted to have its caching and stuff like that, but it's pretty complicated to implement all this. So I decided to just do the recycling key prop to add support for flash list. Overall, I was pretty bummed. It worked, but the inline image component was a downgrade from Expo image. So a few months ago, I did put out a preview of Galleria on Twitter, and I started getting the usual questions. When is it going to get released? Is it open source? You know, what's the holdup? And unfortunately, the bummer was I was just hit with this final issue. I didn't want to put something out that was, like, in most ways, a downgrade. And I could already see the GitHub issues that were coming. Add Expo image support, add React Native image support, add fast image support. It's not caching on Android. It's slow on a flash list. I dreaded every one of these. So my answer to Brent's tweet was, not being able to wrap Expo image is probably the main blocker to releasing this. It's a bit hard to maintain a fork, but I didn't want to give up any of its features. And so things sat there for a few months. We were using it in the BeatGig app, but I wasn't quite proud of it. And then I get a message from Tomas, who works on Expo at Software Mansion. He said the Galleria view could just be a wrapper view around the images. And this, like, small perspective shift was the answer I needed. I just need to get the image instance from the children instead of creating it, which I was doing when I copy-pasted the docs. And that's how I came up with this very simple image gallery that was properly abstracted for React Native. So Galleria is now open source. And if you want, you can take your phone out and scan the QR code if you want to save this for later. Now, keep in mind, it's all a work in progress. And I'll do a full release soon, but I just want to make sure that the source was out there for you to see in the meantime. Now, isn't this just like a Swift library wrapper? Like, after all, what's so special about that? And really, that is the point. When you face a problem in React Native, you don't need to reinvent the wheel in JavaScript. You have access to native primitives and native libraries. So use them when it's useful. If someone who doesn't code heard from you that you're having trouble making an image expand. Their answer would probably be like, well, doesn't like literally every app have that? And the native ones do. Leverage the fact that you can just run Swift and Kotlin. And for those who don't know Swift, I'm sure you might get the urge to ask me how I learned it. But the reality is I've only written like 10 Swift files ever. I don't have much to share. I look at the library that I want to wrap. I read the docs. I read the source code. I reference existing Expo modules. I use ChatGPT. I go on Google. I maybe ask someone on a forum, and eventually land at the right answer. It's bizarre in a way. There are so many necessary components that we all know about out there waiting to get built. And in many cases, just like Galleria, all you need to do is wrap something. So the next time you head to Google looking for that library you need, don't be afraid to pick a native one. Thank you.